Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So glad to be here. I've got some prepared remarks because I'm also representing the FHEO office. Usually I like to just speak from the heart. But thank you all for allowing me to be here today, members of the City Council, Mr. Mayor, Lorraine, on behalf of the Commissioner. I want to echo the Mayor's words. I've worked in federal and state government for about 30 years now, and I've got to say I've got 25 counties and about 11 cities that I'm responsible for now in this job. Actually, the first thing I did in this job was come here and speak at Fair Housing Month luncheon 3 years ago, and 3 years on, here I am again as I approach the third year. And then prior to this, in the Department of Homeland Security, had New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. And it's not so much that I'm from here, been here since '86, and in Schenectady now for, 15, 16 years. So it's really my county, my city. I really think of it that way. But even among the great partners that I've been fortunate to have in my career, I feel really, truly fortunate to work with the city of Schenectady, Lorraine with Commissioner Townsend, and he's really set a great example for how that partnership between municipalities and the state and the federal government should work. So it's been good for me as I sort of came into this job. So we're here to celebrate Fair Housing Month again. And so I want to just leave you with some examples that our 8,500 and something people at HUD, ministering to 360 million Americans across 50 states, some of the things that we come across, and I'll talk in a little more detail about some examples, but let me just give you a couple. A highly regarded institution, been in the community for well over 100 years, opposes a community development project that includes low and moderate income housing. Does it happen in this country? I don't know. Think about that a little bit. A realtor takes around a potential homeowner and sort of steers them towards a suburban setting because of those schools. All right, so let's think about those a little bit, and I'll come back to that after my prepared remarks. So America has experienced tremendous social progress since the Fair Housing Act was signed into law in 1968. We have greater access to jobs, education, and economic opportunities than before. You know, in the prepared remarks, it says minorities. I immigrated here from Colombia, South America as a child, and I'm happy to say that as I look at my 15-year-old and my 22-year-old, that they really look at the world so differently than even those of us that still consider ourselves young looked at it. And really, though there is tremendous issues in our country still with segregation and with the racial divides that we have, by and large, this next generation of young people make it so that instead of saying minorities have great access to jobs, education, and economic opportunities, we can say Americans have greater access to jobs, education, and economic opportunity than before. But despite how far we've come as a nation, unlawful discrimination continues to limit the options of some when it comes to one of life's most fundamental needs, which is housing. And when access to housing is limited, we all know that it makes it even harder for someone to access jobs, to access education and economic opportunities. Last fiscal year, HUD and its Fair Housing Assistance Program partner agencies received 8,648 complaints alleging discrimination based on one of the Fair Housing Act's 7 prohibited bases. As Ahmad said, race, color, national origin, religion, gender, family status, and disability. And our department has gone beyond that in rulemaking and really taking a look at sexual orientation. Again, back to my kids, but I've fashioned so much of my perspective on life now. It's hard for people that grew up in our generation to look and sometimes say that someone's a different lifestyle, who they are, who they see themselves as, to make that something that we can put our arms around. But when you think about the 40% of the children in this country that are homeless identify as either lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgendered people, these are kids, right? And so I'm heartened to see that my own children and their friends and their peers don't have the issues that we do with people's lifestyles and how they self-identify. Certainly our Secretary Castro, and the force of our department as it relates to fair housing has taken significant efforts to go beyond and to interpret it in rulemaking to bring the authority of the Fair Housing Act to that part of our country, and sort of the shame that these children not only have to have problems in having their own families accept them, but then when they go to try and find housing, have that door shut in front of their face as well. So HUD's Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity is working hard to combat unlawful housing discrimination, and through an array of enforcement activities, fair housing policy initiatives, and education and outreach efforts, FHEO is taking appropriate actions against individuals and housing providers that discriminate. We're implementing guidance and rules that help further fair housing and educate the public about their housing rights and what to do if they believe those rights have been violated. In particular, the department has had great success in combating the various forms of discrimination faced by women across the nation. It's not just a thing of how much you earn or what the color of your skin is. Women are still facing significant barriers in obtaining equal housing. Addressing lending discrimination, protecting the rights of persons with disabilities, implementing initiatives that address race discrimination, and putting new emphasis on the programs that increase job opportunities for low-income individuals and public housing residents, and contracts for the businesses that hire them. So 47 years after the Fair Housing Act was passed, the work being done by HUD is not only still relevant, it is helping to create better and stronger communities of opportunity where everyone has equal access to pursue their aspirations. So here we are in 2015. The 2015 Fair Housing Month theme is Fair Housing, It's Your Right, So Use It, which reflects FHEO's renewed commitment to educating the public about their fair housing rights and emphasizes how important it is that every person take action whenever they believe their housing rights have been violated. So do we believe that 6,400 instances are among 360 million people are the only instances of fair housing discrimination that have occurred in the last year? I don't. You can do the math. The theme is also a call to HUD staff, stakeholders, and partners to remain vigilant in addressing the blatant and subtle forms of housing discrimination that persist today. So our department's got a lot of silos, right? We're doing community development. We have funding and significant programs that we pay attention to the very, very important work of public housing in this country. We've got a multifamily housing operation that looks at the imbalance between home ownership and rental units at a fair market rate, rental units for low, moderate income people, for the elderly, and certainly for the disabled. So we spend a lot of time on that. But as well, we have this little part called enforcement, and our ears are efficient and our reach is long with regard to the enforcement piece. And it's not one that traditionally has been particularly highlighted within the department, but in the last two secretaries' terms, it has been, and under Secretary Castro's term, it certainly will be. In its enforcement activities, FHEO has emphasized the investigation of cases that have had broad, significant impact and sought relief for all those who have been harmed by discriminatory practices. And while many of these complaints start out as a single complaint filed by one person that is alleging that they've been harmed by a discriminatory practice, very frequently the evidence leads FHEO to expand the investigation to obtain relief for others harmed by the same practice. In fiscal year 2014, for example, disability was the most common basis of complaints filed with HUD, being cited as a basis for 4,606 complaints, or 54% of the overall total. Disability. Race was the second and most common basis of complaints, being cited as a basis for 2,374 complaints, or 28% of the overall total. And I'm just going to skip over a number of these that Ahmad already called, but we're covered. We're spending a lot of time, obviously, in taking a look at what's going on in lending. So the department spends a ton of time and money trying to make sure that the inventory of housing that's available to low and moderate income individuals in this country is better, that there's a better inventory of housing. And often that work is spent in providing that ladder from homelessness, perhaps to public housing, to assisted housing, to rental, to home ownership, or from home ownership to rental, right? Because we're sort of evolving as a department and as a country. As a majority of our citizenry moves into urban areas, maybe renting, maybe home ownership, which has always been sort of the dream, maybe isn't everyone's dream anymore. Maybe for a millennial or for a boomer, like I'm going to, when I plan to retire one of these days, maybe I want to walk somewhere and have an apartment rather than a home. But to provide those ladders of opportunity. But when we talk about lending and in fair housing, it's a young couple. And it doesn't matter that they're here and they came here from India, or that they're disabled, or that the wife is carrying a baby, or is just off of maternity leave. They should be able to access and obtain either the rental property or purchase the home that they want, based on what they're able to afford and where they want to set up their household and their family. So lending is an area we spend a lot of time on. Maternity, disability, and an important area is, of course, protecting the rights of domestic violence victims. HUD is committed to ensuring that survivors of domestic violence don't have to live in fear of losing their homes, in addition to being in fear for their lives on a daily basis. HUD is accomplishing this through using both the remedies available under the Fair Housing Act and also the Reauthorized Violence Against Women Act. So in 2013, VAWA was expanded its protection to survivors of sexual assault, in addition to the previously covered protections for survivors of domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. So it's just horrible to think that in some of the communities, there was a community in Norristown, Pennsylvania, that had some zoning laws that, basically it was a 3 strikes you're out. If the cops come to your house 3 times and it involves domestic anything, then the landlords had the right to put you out the door. So not only are these predominantly women having to live in an abusive situation, but then when law enforcement and the community, the people that we pay as a community to protect our rights show up, more often than not, they were being disadvantaged. And in addition to what they were suffering through, they in fact lost their housing, and their children, along with the mother, found themselves homeless. So absolutely unacceptable. Having a safe, stable home is critical to helping survivors of domestic violence start a new chapter of their lives free from violence, and our department is sincerely committed to that. We're obviously addressing national origin discrimination. Our country is evolving. There have always been immigrants have been a sort of a foundational piece in our country. I'm one myself. But with the influx of immigrants that are coming into our country now, it's an area that we're readdressing within our department and taking a really good look at. And I spoke about addressing discrimination against families with children, and that takes many forms. There's a place in Napa Valley where they put in some restrictions so that you could, they had a nice pool and everything, but children weren't allowed to swim in the pool during the day. So we fined them, and they changed their rules. And then, of course, disability discrimination. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but when more than half the discrimination claims are against disabled people, just sort of makes you scratch your head. And then finally, a piece I want to talk about is Section 3 and economic opportunities. HUD is putting new energy behind its program that increases job opportunities for low-income individuals and public housing residents, and contracts for the businesses that hire them. Section 3 of the Housing and Urban Development Act of '68 requires that, to the greatest extent feasible, employment and other economic opportunities generated by certain HUD financial assistance be directed to low and very low-income persons, and to businesses that provide economic opportunities to these individuals. So we've made a lot of progress in that area and had some clarification in the last year. The national goal, as many of you know, was 30% of workers hired by Section 3 businesses to be low income. And happy to report the goal has been exceeded. with grantees hiring about 50% of their hires as Section 3 residents. Okay, so that's good news. It's great work that's going on in our public housing authorities and other places. Affirmatively furthering fair housing. The Fair Housing Act made it clear that every American has the right to fair housing, regardless of their race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, or disability. When the Fair Housing Act became law, it not only focused on addressing housing discrimination throughout the real estate market, but it also required that the federal government and its programs take proactive steps to affirmatively further fair housing in every town and neighborhood. This means taking action to reduce barriers to equal housing opportunity. In the past 3 years, the department has been very active in sort of at the macro or wholesale level at taking a look at sort of the underbelly of either zoning or not in my backyard activities that communities have, and that over time don't develop because individual people are bad or want to break the law, but just because of the nature of people and society. It's the same reason that after all these years, after Dr. King helped to change our country and gave his life for it, that there is still discrimination and segregation in parts of this country. So HUD is committed to equipping the people on the ground who implement our programs with clear guidance, partnering with them to achieve better compliance, and reviewing all assessments. Our latest effort is in the area of disparate impact. So this systemic discrimination is being looked at, and as recently as this past January, the Supreme Court of the United States heard oral arguments in Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs via the Inclusive Communities Project, and will decide later this year whether to uphold the disparate impact doctrine, as 11 appellate courts have done for 40 years. So our Secretary Castro is, in commenting on disparate impact, acknowledged that the legal doctrine is a vital tool in HUD's efforts to fight housing discrimination. So now in these 30 years, I've worked for Republican governors and presidents and Democrat governors and presidents. This issue of disparate impact is being played out as a political question. I don't see that it is. As a civil servant, I serve equally and as enthusiastically for the principles that I've served in those positions. And I think that what the department is doing in this light, it may not always do it correctly and certainly not at a comfort level. If you're Westchester County, you're probably fairly uncomfortable to have the light of HUD on you in the last few years. But I think as communities look forward, as your community looks forward, if you look inward and say, and take a look at what are the trends in the city of Schenectady, city of Troy is here with us as well. What can we look at proactively to ensure that we just do the right thing, as the mayor said earlier. So lest we think these problems don't exist in our backyard, I'll go back to my original 2 examples. And let me just tell you, those 2 examples happened here in Schenectady, New York, recently, in the last few years, okay? So the community came together to say, hey, did you really mean this? And no, we didn't really mean that, so it's all right. So our esteemed institution did the right thing. We knew they would. It was me that was taken around by, no, not one of you, a realtor to take a look at houses and said, hey, you got a 15-year-old, right? I don't know. They didn't know I was the HUD guy, I guess, and I was new as the HUD guy, or I don't know, I probably would have sued him. We took a different approach. Last year when we had our summit that your city hosted, we brought in our Fair Housing Assistant Secretary, and we brought in all the realtors and the brokers, and the mayor and I went out and talked to the brokers in the area, and they said, geez, no, that's not what we mean to do. So we provided some training. We collaborated with the mortgage bankers and with the realtors and said, hey, we may want to look at this. And that's 90, if you have 360 million people, okay, that's a lot of the times what's going on. But it's better if you look at it yourselves, okay, in the 25 counties that I'm responsible for, in the 11 cities, that's really what I strive for, to say, hey, what's going on that's terrible in other parts of the country? What's going on here that's questionable? And what can we do together to make sure that we move the ball forward and make it so that as our kids grow, they don't scratch their heads and wonder what's wrong with us. Okay, so I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, I have to tell you, I have to restate where I started. This is an excellent city. You have a great, I wouldn't even say a foundation because we're doing some work in Utica like we did with you for 18 months, and really your city is the example. I look at Schenectady as the city that has the opportunity to be the Raleigh-Durham in the north, right? There are millennial-aged people that are making a decision to stay here. You have Quirky and TransFinder and others that are staying here. You made an investment in Nano, and rather than thinking about going to Florida someday, I'm thinking about how can I have a house here in Schenectady and be able to walk down and take advantage downtown and take advantage of some of these great things. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thanks.